Tantra Illuminated with Dr. Christopher Wallace is a journey through the depths of the human experience, as viewed through the lens of the tradition called non-dual Shaiva Tantra. This multi-format podcast delves into the fascinating world of Classical Tantra and its intersections with philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, human development, and the broader world of spirituality. In this episode, I'm being interviewed by Christine Marie Mason for her podcast entitled The Rose Woman. I've actually known Christine for many, many years. In fact, we were housemates together a long time ago in Mill Valley, California. Her podcast, The Rose Woman, might be of interest to some of you. I'll read the description of it. The Rose Woman talks about things people don't often talk about and looks for topics that offer the listener a new insight or avenue into more power, presence, and freedom. We like to call our programming deprogramming and intend that individual perspective shifts will spark changes in the world. Christine and her guests explore science, spirituality, ecology, philosophy, sexuality, deep wellness, and more. The podcast has a nuanced, warm, and conversational tone with a high level of respect, inquiry, curiosity, and exploration. And in this episode, recorded just a couple of years ago, we explore the evolution of my teaching philosophy, the process of writing Tantra Illuminated and its impact, the evolution of Classical Tantra versus Neo-Tantra and the different goals of each, the concept of near enemies of the truth, direct experience in spiritual practice, the Tantra Illuminated community, and the subject of finding good teachers of spirituality. Enjoy.
My show is reaching about 70% women, 30% men, mostly 40s and up, interested in questions of spirituality and science and ways to sort of shift their mind a little bit in a direction of more joy and freedom. So I've been covering sexuality, psychedelics, consciousness, some health hacks and things like that. A lot of things around institutionalized and internalized depression,
Yeah.
And I will tell you that when I first met you, I think it was through Mark Whitwell. He introduced us in Berkeley. He said, this guy's a Sanskrit scholar. You should study with him if you're really interested in going deep on anything. And then doing your class, which I want to say was 2010.
So 2011.
And that exposure to what is true Tantra as sort of a way of living as a fragment of the light and reflecting back your embodied experience to divinity was a very big turning point in my own life. I'm very grateful to be reconnecting with you now and extending these teachings to a whole group of people, or awareness of you to a whole group of people that I don't think otherwise would come across the work.
I've grown a lot and changed a lot since we last were crossing paths frequently. So much has happened and so many further realizations have come online from everything from the social stuff you're talking about, coming to understand internalized patriarchy much, much deeper than I ever did. I don't know what I understood then, but it probably wasn't anything, to deeper developments on the spiritual path. To me, the difference is huge. If I look back to when we were last talking, I'm like, oh, I was completely clueless then, even if I sounded like I knew some things. And maybe I'll say that in 10 years about now, who knows?
Pretty much guarantee you will, because you're committed to growth. And the thing about growth is every time you turn a corner on a new path, it's like, whoa, a whole new vista opens up. And so that is actually one of the things I've been enjoying in the work that you've been sharing. And also I have the feeling you're having more fun, more integrated humor coming into the work. It's not only that the scholarship is deeper and all of that and your personal practice is deeper, but you really seem more joyful.
Yeah, and less serious. I mean, that is part of the growth, right? To be less serious, to be less solemn or take oneself seriously. I don't take myself seriously so much now, and it's really a different kind of mode, and I'm happy about it. And I can just make my offering or contribution without feeling like I need to think it's important, or I don't, anything like that. Just what's natural. It's like just doing what's natural as opposed to trying to achieve something. That's a big, big shift.
I love that. I'd like to honor the whole journey. I'd like to honor the urgent, earnest scholar who had to get it out because you made such an immense contribution, like basically wrote the textbook on integrative tantric philosophy for many people, which we're going to talk about, and honor that. And then also like honor the spark of consciousness that's helping with whatever growth path is good for your soul and spirit. I love it. I love what it was and where it's going. It's beautiful. So let's talk about that book to start with. I want to say that you were in Bali or Thailand or something, and you were like, I'm writing 10 pages a day, and this book should be done in 302 days. Like you had an incredible disciplined approach to completion. And I wonder if you could touch back in with the motivation for writing that book and sort of where it's gone in the world and the contribution that you feel it's made.
I mean, way back when I was associated with Anusara yoga, John Friend and the Anusara folks, they like to bring in scholar practitioners. So I was one of a string of scholars that were brought in, and I was brought in last because I was younger. So after folks like Carlos Pomeda and Douglas Brooks and Paul Muller, John Friend asked me if I could write this introduction to Tantra, what is Tantra really, book. And as I sat with it, I felt, oh my gosh, this is something that sort of wants to come through me. Like I wouldn't have done it for him, right? Or because of his request. But I felt, oh, this is something that wants to come through me. And I even wrote something to him at the time, and at that time I was in the mountains of India, right? The Himalaya mountains of far North India. I was writing to John Friend saying, if I write this book for you, it's going to be completely honest, and it's not going to be for the Anusara community or for you. Actually, it's going to be for everyone who wants to get in touch with what Tantra is all about. I'm not going to tailor make it to your whims or desires or whatever. And I was kind of like trying to warn him. And I don't want it edited. I don't want it messed with, Fortunately, that's actually what happened. Like it was all done by the seat of our pants, our being the designer, the editor. Like we were essentially all non-professional at the time and since became professional in these fields. But we were just making it up as we went along. And so the book, in a way, wasn't ever properly edited. But that's good, actually, because, I mean, over time, I've taken out all the typos, or most of them, and made it better and better. But it was like nobody could edit it, actually, because it was such a deep dive into the world of classical Tantra that almost nobody knew anything about, And so it was exciting because it's still the only book that's an overview, a comprehensive overview of classical Tantra, pre-modern Tantra, for a general audience, for people who are not academics, they're not intellectuals, but written by an academic who bridges those worlds, who's a practitioner as much as an academic. So it's still a one-of-a-kind book. The reason I spend some time talking about this right now is because it did actually then turn out to be, for those who don't know, incredibly successful, even down to the present day. It was published 12 years ago, and somehow, by some miracle, it is still selling hundreds of copies a month with no advertising, no marketing, nothing, just word of mouth, hundreds of copies a month. It's the Energizer Bunny of books. And when I talk to people in the industry, the publishing industry, I mean, they're like, we have never heard of something like that ever. A nonfiction book that just keeps selling itself for 12 years with no signs of slowing down. Never heard of it in the whole industry. So it's not because I'm such a great writer. I mean, I got lucky and did a pretty good job, but it's mainly because the book met a need, and continues to do so. And people who discover it literally, like, they write to me every week and say, this is my new Bible. This is, it's not because it's giving me a new belief system, but because it is corresponding, it's giving words to my deepest intuitions about the nature of reality. It's giving words to my experience that nobody else could understand. So it's this phenomenon of like 80,000 people or whatever discovering the book and being like, finally someone understands what I've experienced or what I intuit to be true. And there's this whole tradition, which was talking about this 1,000 years ago. So there's all these factors that go into making it this this phenomenal success, not just in terms of copies sold, but the impact, the cultural and spiritual impact that it's had. It's amazing. It's really amazing. And luckily, I was just in the writing process a total servant, meaning I didn't have something to say of my own. I was just presenting the tradition as clearly as I could. I was a servant of that, and I didn't have some brand or some idea or some self-promotion involved when I wrote that at all. And everything magically came together to make this thing that works.
It feels like the service to the lineage, the service to the ideas, and your love of it comes through, because that level of attention and detail is a form of love. And did Ekabumi do the illustrations?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then they're also beautifully illustrated, which also gives another depth to what you're showing or teaching. So I will tell you, like, I did a speech for the American Academy of Sexuality Educators maybe 2 months ago, and I went to their Tantra SIG, their special interest group, and like hung out there for a little bit. And there was no understanding of classical Tantra. They really thought of it as only sacred sexuality. And I was like, no, you guys, you got to read this book. Read this one, add this to your pantheon, put it into its historical context and understand that why Tantra as it came west might have sort of wiggled itself into this Neo-Tantra sexuality only perspective, but it really rests in this much deeper philosophy. Can you speak for a minute to that relationship? Like, how do you think that happened?
That is an incredibly complicated story that really starts well over 100 years ago. So I'll just, for the people who are interested, I'll just sketch it really quick and give some references so that you can follow up more on your own, because it would take a few hours to talk about that in any depth. Basically, there were a couple of super influential figures back in the day, 100 years ago, several that mediated the transmission of ideas around Tantra to the West. The least famous, but actually most important of these figures was a fellow named Pierre Bernard, who started teaching in San Francisco around 1900, thus proving, everything weird and wonderful comes from San Francisco.
Okay. That old axiom. Okay.
No, but really, it was a culture back then. People don't know, but over 100 years ago in San Francisco Bay Area, like, there was even then a culture of openness to new ideas and weird stuff. Pierre Bernard arrives there from the Midwest, and he starts teaching what he calls Tantra. And it's basically Neo-Tantra. Okay, he invented Neo-Tantra in the early 1900s. Now, what was his basis? Well, he had met a Bengali guru. Was he a guru, like an East Indian, right, from the region of Bengal in India? Was he a guru? Was he just a interested dabbler? Who knows? But he impressed Pierre Bernard quite a lot and taught him some things about Indian Tantra, as the spiritual tradition, including some things about how it didn't exclude the dimensions of human life that other religions like Christianity excluded, especially at that time. So it didn't exclude the sexual dimension of our being. It didn't exclude any dimension of our being. In fact, consciously included every dimension, including the sexual, but not especially the sexual. Now, Pierre Bernard was fascinated by this. And when he started teaching his version of Tantra in San Fran in 1900 or so, he was still young at the time, and he taught a version that was essentially designed to get him laid. And this is not so different from...
Wow. I know a few cult leaders. I'm sorry, ISTA practitioners. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. I should not use their actual, but they're still acting that way today.
Yeah, exactly. So he taught, the highest form of initiation and Tantra is, having sex with the guru, who's me, by the way, and all this stuff. And anyway, he also taught some very interesting occult things. He mixed what he had heard about Tantra with Western occultism and his own sexual desires. And he was the beginning point for all Neo-Tantra in America. And not only was he teaching then, but he went on to teach for many, many, many more years. But he changed over time because he got thrown in jail for, the usual things. And then he changed his approach. He stopped having sex with students. He started teaching physical yoga. He started teaching postural yoga. And people in the 1930s were pretty freaked out about that too, right? They thought that was super weird. But he wasn't going to jail anymore for having sex with someone's wife or whatever, Then he became an important figure in the early days of yoga, physical yoga in America. And you can read all this in a really wonderful book called The Great spelled OOM, The Great one of the many names Pierre Bernard gave himself. There's that. And then there's also stuff that was getting started in the UK. Aleister Crowley and his sex magic, very much influenced by things he had heard about Tantra, though he didn't use that word. Then there was Annie Besant of the Theosophical Society, and she was teaching quasi-tantric ideas without the sexual dimension. But her ideas, which included ideas about manifestation and accessing the wisdom of disembodied ascended masters and stuff like that, all that got into the mix. And so already by 80, 90 years ago, all this stuff was in the mix. The stuff that we think of as new age, it's 100 years old. So people involved in Neo-Tantra, they have lineage of a kind, right? They can say, I learned this from my teacher, who got it from their teacher, who got it from their teacher. And it fades out rapidly because it's primarily oral transmission. And they have a sense that it's very old, and they don't realize it's 100 years old, not more than that. What is the relation then of Neo-Tantra, what scholars call Neo-Tantra or modern American sexual Tantra? Because it is a quintessentially American thing, really. The difference between that and classical Tantra is huge because the original progenitors didn't have direct access to classical Tantra because you needed formal initiation. You needed access to a lineage that carefully preserved and guarded its teachings, and people didn't have that. So to be clear, when others like Osho or Rajneesh come into this mix, he also did not have, despite being Indian, he did not have access to real Tantra teaching, the verbal remix of everything he had read, but no actual access to real Tantra on the part of any of these folks. So they improvised.
And their improvisation must have had some magic or something to it because so many people glommed onto it.
Yeah, it's not to say that any of this is bad or wrong. I mean,
it just doesn't have the connection back to the classical piece.
Right.
Interesting.
Whether a teaching or practice is harmful or helpful has nothing to do really with its origin. That's why the great philosopher William James the originator of much of what we understand about psychology. People think it's Freud, but it was actually William James. Anyway, he wrote in the early 1900s about the concept of fruits, not roots. That is to say, measure a spiritual teaching or practice or experience by its fruits, not its alleged roots. Measure the value of it, I should have said, by its fruits, not its alleged roots. This is actually a very good guideline because all kinds of bullshit is justified on the basis of putative ancient roots. There might be good stuff coming along that doesn't have such roots. So it really has to be evaluated on its own merits because of the impact that it has.
Well, I also like the idea of maybe finding fruits and roots at some point where you have the root understanding of its evolution, because things have that essence inside of them as they grow and spread. And so you know where it's coming from and how it originally formed. And then you also get to have the direct experience. It also gives a little longevity cred.
Yes. There's that one thing, like the only reason to pay attention to how old something is because, has it been tried and tested over generations in multiple different cultures? That actually matters. If we're talking about a globalized scenario that we have now, how do you know a practice or a teaching is going to work for virtually anyone, anywhere? Only if it's been tried and tested over multiple generations in multiple cultures. And Classical Tantra was, even before the modern period it was, because Classical Tantra spread into Southeast Asia, the whole of the Indian subcontinent, of course, all the way to places like Bali, and then it spread all the way to places like Japan and Korea, Vietnam. So, and it flourished in all these areas over hundreds of years, right? So that is some credibility right there. But the main problem, from my point of view, with people not knowing how deeply different Neo-Tantra and Classical Tantra are, is that if they don't know, they don't bother to investigate and find out, well, what is going on in Classical Tantra. For the same reason, I tell people, look, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is literally the least appropriate central text for modern yoga teacher trainings that you could possibly select. And the problem is that if people don't know that there were traditions, and still are, that celebrated the body, that taught how to go deeper into embodiment, you don't bother to investigate those. And you've got, people like Patanjali saying, no, the goal is to get out of the body, to transcend. And here's Tantra, Classical Tantra, saying, actually, we can experience divinity in and as our humanity, and yet it hasn't gotten, at least until very recently, the attention it deserves because people just don't know what a treasure trove the classical tantric tradition is for teachings and practices. Last piece on this, just to differentiate them really clearly. In classical tantra, the goal of practice is always radical freedom from your socio-cultural conditioning, where that binds and constrains your experience, freedom from mind-created suffering, freedom from the unresolved experiences from the past that are hanging out in your system, and virtually every other kind of freedom that you can think of, but those are the main ones the tradition is concerned with. And freedom to be completely natural in harmonious flow with the energy of existence, with the totality of being. That is the goal. In other words, spiritual liberation. The goal is never about how to feel good, how to have better orgasms, how to have a deeper relationship with your partner. So the goal is fundamentally different. Even when Neo-Tantra is in its more sophisticated expressions, it's still usually about how to have a better relationship, how to go deeper with your partner, how to have more intimacy, how to have better sex, energetic intimacy as well. And that's all beautiful when done well. That's laudable, but it's a different goal from classical tantra.
I mean, I feel like that would be the side effect if you were be natural, be in the flow, be unattached to prior stories of suffering. If all those things were happening on the natural, your energy would be moving and your relationships would be better. So
I agree.
it feels like focusing on that is like putting the symptom or the outcome at the heart of it versus looking at the core cause.
Exactly. Very well said.
Beautiful. So here we are. You're bringing this forward at a time when we have the Instagramification of every idea of neo-spirituality, every sort of blending of the quantum science that's being documented in actual physics with manifestation theology, or everything's memeified. And here you come sort of at this next juncture and you say, look, there are a lot of good things out there that are in these memes, but you're not mining the gold. How did this current book, The Near Enemies of the Truth, emerge?
Yeah, from observing exactly that there are some really significant negative effects to not only memification, but I mean, memification is itself a symptom, right, of the shortening of the attention span and the commodifying of attention in social media, right? And the deeper issue of, as it often is a capitalistic structure in which what sells best wins, and what sells best is not necessarily the best thing for people, right? And in this culture of faster, more streamlined and everything, it's like, oh, let's try to boil things down to their essence and get these cliches or these, bumper stickers or these easy to say phrases, like be in the present moment, follow your bliss, speak your truth, everything happens for the best. The universe is giving me a sign. There's so many, right? And I became super interested in how people were using these phrases constantly in spiritual communities, not just so-called New Age, but in all the alternative spiritual communities and even some mainstream ones, using these phrases without really inquiring, well, what does this actually mean and how might it be problematic if misinterpreted? Because when you try to boil an idea down to a pithy phrase, you almost always end up with a near enemy of the truth. Okay, so just to define that really quickly, something that's close to the truth, so it's near, but it's also an enemy of the truth in the long run. Like, it'll work as a stopgap. It'll work in some context to help you a little bit. But in the longer run, it's going to lead you astray, even though it's adjacent to a truth. It's not close enough, right? So, for example, give very simple examples, in Buddhism, they say the near enemy of compassion is pity. The near enemy of love is attachment, right? So those are very simple examples, just single words. But I was interested in the more complex examples, like if be your best self is a near enemy of the truth, what is the truth in relation to which it is a near enemy, right? And that's what the book is about. It takes these 19 spiritual cliches that almost everybody hearing the podcast, you've said one or more of these with possibly deep conviction. And you've heard nearly all of them, probably all of them, bandied about as as truth, but they are shortcuts to a deep inner contemplative process, which is so beneficial. And the shortcut is not the shortcut, the near enemy statement, like whatever it is. I've given some examples. You create your own reality. That's another one. It's like a Band-Aid you're trying to put onto your experience, or to make sense of your experience, or justify something. When it becomes a truism, it's not investigated. So what I argue in the book is that all of these statements, there is a deep truth to which they are adjacent, but that deep truth cannot be said in a bumper sticker phrase. So the point is you have to read the chapter to go on a journey. There's a chapter for each near enemy, and you go on a journey and you find out, if you do the contemplation and go in the process, you find out what, in your own experience, the deeper truth is, to which the cliched phrase is merely a near enemy. And you realize, oh, that can't be put in just a few words because it's too nuanced. It's too ineffable. It can't easily be captured in words, and for good reason, because it has to do with experience, human experience, which is not easily capturable in words. Everything that can easily be put into words is a concept. Concepts are put into words, but concepts are not what help us go deeper into and more fully, lovingly embrace our human experience. So that's the idea.
Yeah, there's something deep in here that is, like, this one in particular works on so many levels in the culture right now. You've got the ideas of, like, everybody has their own unique truth. Yes, that's true, right? Yes, that's accurate. Like, we all have our perceptual filters, that there is no objective truth. All of that's true. But I'm more interested in this idea of abstraction layers. Like, you have your actual embodied experience with all your senses coming in. But even by the time that's formed as a full thought in the brain, it's like you've got visual perception, audio perception, and it's all getting integrated in the back of the brain. And even in the integration, there's line loss, where it's like co-located with a timestamp and turned into a memory. You've already abstracted away from the initial direct experience in the body. And then you try to summarize that with a pointer or a shortcut. And then you take a picture of that. And then you put metadata around that. And then you share that picture on social media to other people out of context. And that as each layer of abstraction increases, you're getting more and more distant from that direct experience, but that we're being acculturated. Like, I went out last night and I was in a really unique and beautiful place. And there was a portion of my attention the entire time, like self-narrating and curating what from that moment I could take a picture of and share it public. And that thing, that very sort of extraction and, like, objectification, parsing of the full scene to take a picture of one small piece would already completely mistranslate the direct experience to the viewer. And so it feels like this speak your truth ties deeply into the overarching idea of the book and memetics, that in some way there is no way to fully speak and give a shortcut to the truth. It is utterly, deeply direct experience.
Yes.
That was a long ramble, but I hope.
Beautiful. No, that was beautiful. That was amazing, because it's exactly right. How people are not, for the most part, not considering how we are not just one step removed from what we might call direct experience, but multiple steps removed. It's the soup of the soup of the soup of the soup, especially when you're, absorbing through technology.
Mm-hmm.
But let me drill down on this a little bit. So direct experience, just putting neuroscience aside for the moment, right? In a spiritual sense, when we talk about direct experience, we just mean that which is prior to the formulation of an interpretation or narrative or judgment, or even a kind of mental frame. Because as soon as you have any of that, that changes the nature of the experience. And because humans in the 21st century especially have become such conceptual creatures, they don't even notice that the interpretation of the experience has now changed the experience, that the experience itself matches the interpretation more because the interpretation has been overlaid onto the experience, and confirmation bias does its work and other stuff falls away, doesn't get noticed. Something else gets highlighted because of that interpretation. And then we end up experiencing our concept of the experience and not even noticing that we've lost the original. We only have a copy and a copy of a copy, because then you remember it, and that it changes every time, So direct experience is by its very nature, of course, ineffable. It cannot be described in words. It cannot be conceptualized because as soon as it is, it's not direct experience. But it can be entered into through, it requires quite a bit of patience, but it's a meditative process by which you keep setting aside all the thoughts that are trying to impose themselves, the interpretations that are trying to get in there, the mind's attempts to understand. All of that keeps getting relentlessly set aside, but you have to be patient and gentle. And you keep going into the body, you keep going into the sensual field until you're experiencing it so directly that you don't know what it is. Like you would honestly say, I don't know what body is. I used to think I know, but that was a concept.
That is such a sensual invitation.
It is.
Like even as you're saying it, I'm like breathing into what you're saying. Like, what does it feel like to not know anything?
Yeah, and there is still the qualia of experience. So like that's a helpful term, right? Qualia in terms of the redness of red is there in direct experience even without any concept or even without the word, if you were to forget the word red, right? And in the same way, all the qualia of experience are already there prior to interpretation, prior to labeling. And so we do this like thought experiment where it's like, oh, pretend right now you didn't have a name. Pretend right now you didn't have memories, but everything else is here. Awareness is here and experience is here. Without memory and without labels, it actually gets more vivid. Experience becomes much more vivid and visceral and sensual. This is the true sensuality of Tantra, by the way, right? Going deeper into the sense fields, and everything is heightened and everything is more beautiful because you're not seeing it through a conceptual lens anymore.
It's the ultimate presence.
The ultimate presence?
Yeah, it's the ultimate, like being present here. I mean, it feels a little overwhelming.
It can be, but then the next step in the process is to actually dissolve the false sense of a separate self, because that's what gets overwhelmed. If you don't have a separate self, you can't get overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is okay. This is so beautiful. I'm trying to do it. If you're in a place where you're not driving, basically, if you're not driving right now, what would it be like to look at everything around you without any labels, names, knowing of what it is, without naming it, and just to like see it and see it shape and feel it? Like that exercise is what I mean. Is like what it's doing, even as I do it here and look at my. Now I'm not going to label them colored pencils, but I'm going to look at the colors like it, and I like try to like really feel them. They fill the space, and like they pop out in their hyperqualia, like all the subtleties pop out. And a few minutes ago, they were just like a background. So I wasn't here with them because I'd labeled them pencils and they were sitting across from me. So I think when I say it's overwhelming, that bringing in that level of perceptual awareness shuts down a lot of thought. It shuts down a lot of extraneous factors that aren't right here, right now. It literally overwhelms the thought capacity with perception, in a good way, with perception.
In a good way, yeah. Having done that, then the invitation is to go more subtle with it. And by more subtle, I mean going into dimensions of experience that are not sensual. But you practice, you always start with the sense fields, you always start with the physical body. And then you go into these realms of experience that are more subtle. And I'm not talking about the imagined realms of experience that, people who claim to be psychic are talking about. No, I'm talking about just the experience everyone is having, but they don't notice. So the subtler dimensions of embodiment, because if you go into the depths of the body, it's a profound mystery, and you discover these subtle and sometimes not subtle energies that you didn't know were there, and they start expressing themselves because all it takes is some attention, some awareness, and that is a kind of power, directing awareness into the depths of embodied experience. And whatever's there starts revealing itself and even unraveling itself, which is a great thing. Now, to some people, it might sound, that sounds scary. What if whatever's in there is not good? But it's not like that. It's more like we get stuck, we get stagnant in our habits, our ways of thinking, our behavior patterns, and most importantly, unresolved pieces of experience that are hanging out in our body from the past. And when we go into those and let them reveal themselves, let them express themselves, let them unravel and unbind, then there's freedom, there's flow, and everything finds its proper place in the whole system. Some stuff needs to release, some stuff needs to digest and integrate, and it's never gotten a chance to do so because it never got bathed in the light of awareness.
This idea, the healing versus digestion question, has been a big part of my journey this last couple of years. That my feeling right now is that all of human conflict and cultural conflicts come down to the inability to hold the completeness of one's own experience without blaming, shaming, or spewing on somebody else. And that the entire development of inner peace is a capacity to digest what has already happened and to be in a clean out process that you can hold whatever's happening. You can hold it without trying to smack the other guy or take their toy or whatever. The emphasis in modern trauma healing, et cetera, like this idea that it's going to be that you're going to be at an end point and be healed, versus I have just expanded my capacity to digest experience in real time, and it doesn't linger.
Exactly. And just a little quibble with language, you can't hold it all because it's too much, right? And the imagined separate self isn't capable of that. The self we think we are and even experience ourselves to be, right? So the cue in classical tantra is more like, at least in the Krama lineage, which I've gravitated to more since you and I were last talking, the cue there is, instead of hold space for, try to hold it, to become the totality of your experience, to melt the apparent separate self into the total field of experience. Completely.
Yeah.
And if you become the whole field of experience, then digestion, what we call digestion of emotion and experience, becomes a natural process because it wants to digest. It's just that you're resisting because sadness or grief or anger or whatever it is feels uncomfortable. So our instinct that's trained into us is not to bring it in close, but to try to analyze it or handle it. People say, how can I handle these feelings? And I say, your job is not to handle them. It never was. You rather bring them in close, let yourself not only feel the feeling, let yourself become it. Stop being a person having emotions, just become the energy completely. And the stories about it fall away because the energy is already pure. Even these so-called negative emotions are nothing but pure energy when experienced in their real nature.
Or positive emotion.
Yeah.
Or the positive one. So this is interesting. Please always quibble. It's one of your great gifts to find, to poke at how the language is not guiding you into the ultimate
right
correct place. So when I say hold it, there's a quality to saying I can hold the experience that's like a discipleship, like a little bit of martyrdom, like I'm a strong, I see what you mean. Versus being like, I can receive it. I can unify with it. I can ride the wave of that. I can be the wave of that. And then it dissipates. That's very different. Good. That's great. Thank you.
I can become it. I don't even need the I. I don't need this concept of being a person who's handling it or managing it or making it through.
That's right.
I can just surrender to experience so radically that experience resolves itself. The mind is scared about this. The mind is like, how could that possibly work? But it does. It does. And the only caveat you need for the listeners, the only caveat you need is that you're not surrendering to your story. You're not surrendering to your belief about the emotions. You're just surrendering to the experience. So the contents of thought are not relevant. Thoughts are fine. They're perfectly fine, but their contents are not relevant. Their contents are a made up story justifying experience, trying to explain away experience. So you don't ever surrender to your story about experience because it's not real. You surrender to experience and it will resolve itself.
Beautiful. I want to tell people that in the audio version of the book, which you narrate yourself, and obviously of this beautiful, deep voice, so it's such a joy to listen to. At the end of those chapters, you actually do a guided experience, a guided meditation to sort of help people explore these topics, these near enemies on their own, investigating their own, like, have a look inside. How is that for you?
And by the way, when I read the audiobook, my voice is actually deeper because I'm consciously speaking from the belly. I'm speaking from the heart and the belly, and it changes the quality of the voice a bit. It goes a little deeper. It can happen at any time, but it happens when I read because I'm trying to share not just the words, but the energy of where those words came from, and trying to share that with the reader or listener. And yeah, there's these guided meditations or contemplations, practices that really work better in audio format. I mean, get the print book if you want, but the audio, it's like you can be in the practice and just go with it. Yeah.
Tell me about your community now. You're teaching all over the world. You have online community. You have a lot of people on Facebook. How are people interacting with you? How's that? And what's your life like day to day in the process of holding the community and holding the teaching?
Yeah, it's always changing. But the community is not on social media so much anymore. We do have this big Facebook group and stuff, but we've moved the community off there for the most part. Like, all the activity is happening in our own educational platform, which is tantrailluminated.org. So we have at this point 600 or 700 really dedicated students, like the ones who are really studying and practicing a lot, and are very dedicated. And then we have some thousands that are very interested, but not necessarily super dedicated yet. So the kind of ambit of the community in terms of active participants is, maybe something like 10,000 people around the world in all different countries, all different everything. It's diverse, it's wonderful. But most important of all is that when we gather online or in person, our gatherings will usually be like anywhere from 50 to 150 people, online or in person. And the vibe, I just feel so blessed and so lucky because this community, they're the most loving, smart, also, good-hearted, caring people. They look out for each other. They support each other. I never even would have imagined it's possible. It's just this flourishing community where people who are newer, they get looked after, taken under the wing of those who are more experienced, and so non-judgmental. Like, everyone talks about being non-judgmental, of course, in spiritual community, but it's amazing to see it actually happening, where it's seemingly nothing anyone could say that would make others reject them, or judge them or whatever. I mean, people might have their feelings, right? They might get upset about something someone else said, but the freedom from judgment in the community is amazing. So I'm just, from my perspective, these are the most important characteristics that I celebrate. It's almost like I was an intellectual who realized intellectuality was not going to avail, was not going to get me where I wanted to go. So I got deeper and deeper into practice, more and more into the felt sense experience, like we've been talking about. And somehow I was lucky enough to kind of transmit my journey accurately enough that I attracted people who were on the same page, people who were smart and who'd done all the reading and learned all the things, but they realized, oh no, I need to find a way to go deeper with this. I read the books. How do we live this? And so it's it's just incredible community. We do retreats all over the world, really, from California to India.
I think for me, this philosophy, I loved being in church as a kid when it was just mysticism and there were no ideas. And then as an adult, I despised it because it made my body bad. And it made me want to be out of this world and go to the next world. And there were all kinds of things that didn't work. And when I found Tantra, it felt like an incredibly healing gesture. And now I am committed to that life. And I'm studying Tamil Siddhant with Patrick Connor. And that's like a whole nother, the light in the body. I've been spending a lot more time down in Tiru and, diving. I was in Sri Lanka at the temple at Kataragama in February and look right at the fractal or that sort of descending imminent light in that philosophy sort of was born. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful way to live. I have no doubt that if you've got committed practitioners who are like, everything's holy, it's all one, we're here to experience it and love it all, that's got to have a tremendous vibe.
Yeah. And here's to connect the dots a little, this Tamil Siddhant, its origin historically is in Shaiva Siddhanta, which is part of Tantric Shaivism, right? So a lot of people don't even realize that it is Tantric, right? Because it doesn't have these transgressive elements, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, classical Tantra includes Shaiva Siddhanta, which evolved into several forms, one of which is this Tamil Siddhant.
I adore you. I'm so glad to see you joyful. And so glad to see how I've been having an experience over the last weeks of reconnecting with many people who are 10, 15-year relationships where you touch base and you kind of say, how have you evolved? Who have you become? And it's been so delightful to trust your instinct with a person and all of the things that happen, and then to see them and flourish. To see them. I have yet to have an experience of reconnecting with someone from long ago where it hasn't been like, wow, look at the amazing journey you've been on and loving them more, Is there anything that you want to make sure we take away before I go into pitching your book?
Yeah, just that for anyone hearing this podcast, just know that everything I've talked about is explored in much more detail in this classical Tantra tradition and in the things that I've written, and there's much more to discover, right? If you're intrigued, it's worth digging deeper. And again, it's not intellectually, it's as a guide to deeper experience. So whether you check out my platform or go in some other direction, just know there's so much for you. And so much richness to explore. And what I just want to say is don't waste time with any teacher who cannot make what they're teaching crystal clear for you. Because life is too short and people spend a lot of time listening to spiritual teachers who sound impressive or mystical or whatever, but when the chips are down, they don't have the clarity in themselves to get it across to the student with crystal clarity. And that's what you need. You need to it's not about understanding concepts. It's about understanding the mechanism by which transformation occurs, the mechanism by which we become free. And that needs to be taught with utmost clarity so that then the mind relaxes and goes, oh, okay, now it's just a matter of doing it, of going deeper into my own experience, even though it can be scary. You need to get convinced. The mind must be convinced about how is this going to work in order to give yourself to it fully. And for that, you need teachers that are crystal clear with integrity, right? We don't need to do any more of this excusing teachers of bad conduct or whatever, because, they have something to offer. There's people who have something to offer out there that are not, screwing around or whatever, and that really care about the well-being of their students more than anything else. And so don't waste time with anything else. That's what I'm saying.
I love that. I care about the well-being of your students more than anything else.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, you can always find out more about the tradition of non-dual Shaiva Tantra at tantrailluminated.org, where, if you wish, you can become a subscriber to our online learning portal, and you'll receive access to a vast number of recordings, including a comprehensive curriculum in tantric philosophy, tantric yoga, guided meditation, and much, much more. Music for the podcast composed and recorded by Ann Leader. Find her at annleader.com. Podcast produced by Grazia Tribulato. New episodes drop every week, and may all beings benefit.